Welcome to Attic Static. Today we have two stories for you, The Vigil of the Waking Eye and The Frequency of Whispers. Sit down, relax, and enjoy. The Vigil of the Waking Eye. I am writing this because I can finally do so without my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. For 3 years, I lived in that cabin on the peak of Mount Solitude. Most people go to the mountains to find silence, but I went there to escape the noise of my own thoughts. At least, that was my plan until the first blizzard struck. It started on the third night. The wind wasn't just blowing, it was screaming, carving tunnels through the heavy snow outside. Inside, the hearth crackled, casting long, dancing shadows against the timber walls. I remember sitting in my armchair, a book balanced on my lap, feeling perfectly safe. That was when I heard the first click. It was faint, a sound like a dry twig snapping underfoot just beyond the circle of firelight. I sat up, eyes scanning the room. Nothing moved. The cabin was empty. Then came the second sound, a rhythmic, wet sliding noise, as if something heavy and damp were being dragged across the floorboards. It started at the far end of the room and traveled toward me. I held my breath, expecting a mouse or perhaps a fallen branch, but the silence that followed was heavier than before. That was when I saw it, the first flicker of movement in the corner. A shadow, darker than the surrounding gloom, detached itself from the wall. It didn't have a face, not exactly. It looked like a smudge of charcoal against the wood, shifting and pulsing. I realized then what the old local guide had told me before I left. The cabin of the waking eye is only safe as long as you remain conscious. He hadn't explained what happened when you closed your eyes, but his voice had been strained with a strange sort of pity. By the second night, the shadow had grown more defined. It wasn't just a smudge anymore. It was a tall, spindly figure with limbs that seemed too long for its body. It didn't walk so much as glide, its movements fluid and eerily graceful. Every time I blinked, it moved closer. I tried to stay awake during the day, but the night was relentless. The shadow began to mimic the sounds of the cabin. It would hum a low, vibrating note that felt like it was coming from inside my own skull. It would imitate the sound of a door creaking, even though the doors were shut. Most unsettling was its habit of reaching. When I finally drifted into a shallow doze, I would feel a cold, needle-like sensation on my shoulder, as if a long finger were tracing the line of my spine. By the fourth night, the terror became physical. The shadow began to manifest features too pale, glowing spheres for eyes and a mouth that stayed in a perpetual, slightly crooked grin. It didn't just move, it inhabited the space. When I was awake, it hovered near the ceiling like a ghost. But the moment my eyelids grew heavy, it would drop down. I began to realize the true nature of its existence. The shadow wasn't just an inhabitant, it was a scavenger of dreams. It waited for the precise moment my consciousness flickered. If I fell into a deep sleep, it wouldn't just stand near me, it would step into my mind. I spent 48 hours in a state of caffeine-fueled delirium, trying to outrun exhaustion. My eyes burned and my head throbbed, but I refused to let them close. Every time my chin dipped toward my chest, the shadow would lunge forward, its long fingers reaching for my forehead as if to pluck the sleep from my brain. On the fifth night, the storm reached its peak. The wind was a roar and the temperature plummeted. I sat in the center of the room, shivering, my eyes squeezed shut just enough to rest, but wide enough to see. Then it happened. I succumbed. A wave of overwhelming tiredness crashed over me like a tide, and for 3 seconds, I drifted into a dreamless sleep. In those 3 seconds, the shadow didn't just move, it merged with me. I felt its cold weight settle on my chest, and its long fingers wrapped around my ribs. I woke up with a gasp, my heart racing. The shadow was no longer in the corner. It was standing directly over me, its face inches from mine. Its mouth opened, and instead of a sound, I felt a rush of images, memories that weren't mine, a forest of glass trees, a sea of silver sand, and a city built of frozen music. It had been feeding on my subconscious. I realized then that the shadow was hungry. It wasn't just a visitor, it was a parasite. If I let it stay forever, it would eventually consume every memory and dream until there was nothing left of me. But tonight, as I sit here writing this, the cabin is quiet. The storm has passed, leaving the world draped in a pristine white blanket. And the shadow? It is gone. I learned how to tame it. After that first merge, I stopped fighting sleep and started inviting the shadow into my dreams on my own terms. Instead of being caught off guard, I began to build my dreams like a house, preparing rooms for the shadow to explore. Last night, I fell into the deepest sleep I have had in weeks. I didn't feel the cold reach or the sudden lunge. I saw the glass forest and felt the silver sand. The shadow moved through my thoughts like a guest in a familiar home, painting colors onto my memories until they glowed with a new, ethereal light. I woke up this morning feeling more refreshed than I have in years. For the first time, when I opened my eyes, the shadow was waiting at the foot of my bed, its crooked grin wider than ever. It wasn't a predator anymore, it was a companion. The warning, "Do not fall asleep," still holds true for most, but for me, it is no longer a threat, it is an invitation. And now, our next story. The frequency of whispers. Scene 1. I am standing on the balcony of my lodge room, watching the snow fall in heavy, silent sheets. The ski resort is officially closed for the night, the lifts have stopped humming, and the bustling crowds have retreated to their beds. It is that peculiar hour when a mountain feels alive only because it is quiet. The air tastes like ice and pine needles. I hold my handheld radio, a gift from the resort concierge, clutched in my gloved hands. For now, there is nothing but the rhythmic white noise of the wind. Scene 2. I press the button on the side of the radio to test it. A burst of static crackles into my ear, sharp and dry like the sound of dead leaves skittering over stone. Then a voice cuts through. It isn't the booming tone of a tour guide or the frantic chirp of a rescue team. It is soft, melodic, and slightly distorted. "It's very cold for someone who spent so much time hiding from the sun," the voice says. Scene 3. I freeze. I hadn't spoken. My heart gives a small, involuntary thump against my ribs. The resort is empty, or it should be. There are no other guests on this balcony level. I look toward the darkened hallway of the lodge, wondering if someone is simply testing the equipment. I press the button again to reply, but before I can speak, the voice returns instantly. Scene 4. You chose the blue chair today, the radio whispers. Because you were afraid of falling into the deep shadows of the green ones. My breath hitches. I did choose the blue chair earlier that afternoon, and I remember thinking the green ones looked intimidatingly steep. The voice doesn't sound like it's coming from a person nearby. It sounds like it's emanating from inside my own skull. Scene 5. I step back into the room, my boots crunching on the wooden floorboards. I want to dismiss it as a trick of the wind or a lingering echo, but the radio remains hot in my palm. I speak into the receiver. "Who is this?" I ask, my voice sounding small in the vast emptiness of the lodge. The response is almost instantaneous. Scene 6. The one who knows why you still wear your mother's locket when no one is watching, the radio replies. A shiver races down my spine. That was a private thought, a secret I hadn't shared with anyone since moving to this mountain town. The voice is gaining confidence now, losing its initial breathy quality and becoming more intentional. It feels as though it is observing me from just behind the door. Scene 7. The atmosphere in the room shifts. The shadows in the corners seem to deepen, stretching toward the center of the floor like reaching fingers. I can hear a faint scraping sound, the sound of something heavy being dragged across the floorboards in the room directly above mine. The radio crackles again, and this time, the voice is almost a sigh. Scene 8. You think you are alone, the radio murmurs. But you are only hiding from what follows. Suddenly, I hear a distinct thud from just outside my door. Then another. Asterisk thump. Thump. Asterisk. It's rhythmic, like a slow, deliberate heartbeat. I grip the radio so hard my knuckles turn white. The voice speaks again, but this time, it sounds closer, as if the speaker is standing right beside my chair. Scene 9. Do not be afraid of the dark, the voice says, and for the first time, I hear a faint, dry chuckle. The dark is just where the secrets live. At that moment, the door to my room creaks open an inch. A sliver of silver moonlight cuts through the gap. There is no person visible yet, but the air smells of ozone and ancient dust. The radio begins to hum with a high-pitched frequency, vibrating against my chest. Scene 10. I stand up, my courage finally overtaking my fear. I hold the radio out toward the crack in the door. Show yourself, I command. A pale, slender hand, long-fingered and glowing faintly with a soft, pearlescent light, reaches through the gap, touching the face of the radio. The voice speaks one last time, no longer coming from the device, but filling the entire room. I am here. With a final pulse of light, the hand retreats and the door swings wide to reveal a small, shimmering entity made of starlight and frost. It bows slightly to me, then fades into a mist of sparkling snow, leaving the room perfectly silent once more. The end. Subscribe for more horror stories and make sure to like.